Hi, I'm Tasha Suri, and I am the author of the Books of Amber Duology, Empire of Sand and Realm of Ash, which are two epic fantasy novels based on the history of Mughal India, so sort of the medieval to early modern period in North India. Next April, I have a new series coming out which begins with The Jasmine Throne, and that is about a vengeful captive princess and a maidservant with forbidden magic who work together in order to bring down the princess's tyrant brother. And it's also a love story, which is really lovely, and I'm very excited to share that with you in about 12 months. I was going to be a guest of Åcon, which I've hopefully pronounced correctly, but if I haven't, I'm sorry, this year in May. Obviously, May is gone. The convention couldn't go ahead in its normal form, which is a real shame. But I am really happy that I get the chance to talk to you via the internet instead. It won't be exactly the same as getting to be the guest of honour at a convention and getting to meet you all in person. I've been told that the convention is a lovely, close-knit community, and I would have had the chance to explore the area a little bit, which would have been lovely. But instead you get to see my Lego collection behind me and listen to me talk online, so that's something. I'm going to be talking for about 40 minutes, I expect. I've got a number of interview questions that were sent to me by people attending the convention and also by people on Twitter that I'm going to be answering. And I will also begin by doing a 10-minute reading from Empire of Sand, my first book. If you're not a huge fan of readings, I will wave my hand like this once I've finished doing the reading and you can jump in for the interview questions instead. But if you do enjoy readings, hopefully you will enjoy the reading that is now going to follow. So, Empire of Sand is the story of a woman who has secret forbidden magic in her blood. Clearly that's a theme in a lot of the things I write. When she accidentally reveals that magic to one of the Emperor's sinister followers, somehow, she gets coerced into an arranged marriage so that the Maha, the sinister semi-immortal figure that runs the empire, can control her magic. But luckily her husband is not particularly happy about this situation either and works with her to try and protect her choices and his own within the context of the horrible situation that they're in. This all sounds pretty grim, but there is a lot of dance magic and dream magic and love, so it's mildly less grim than it sounds. I promise it's a good read. I'm going to read you two excerpts in one go from the beginning of the book, just to give you a sense of what it's like. So I will go ahead now. Meher woke up to a soft voice calling her name. Without thought, she reached a hand beneath her pillow and closed her fingers carefully around the hilt of her dagger. She could feel the smoothness of the large opal embedded in the hilt, and its familiar weight beneath her fingertips calmed her. She sat up and pushed back the layer of gauze surrounding her divan. "Who is it?" she called out. The room was dark, apart from one wavering light. As the light approached, Meher realised it was an oil lantern, held aloft by a maidservant she knew by sight but not by name. Through the glare of the lit flame, the maidservant's features looked distorted, her eyes wide with nervousness. "I'm sorry to disturb you, my lady," the maid said, "but your sister's asking for you." Meher paused for a moment. Then she slid off the divan and wound the sash of her sleep robe tight around her waist. "You work in the nursery?" "Yes, my lady." "Then you should know Lady Mariehamn won't be pleased that you've come to me," she said, tucking the dagger into her sash. "If she finds out, you may be punished." The maidservant swallowed. "Lady Arwa is asking for you," she repeated. "She won't sleep. She's very distressed, my lady." "Arwa is a child," Meher replied, "and children are often distressed. Why risk your position, and come to me?" The light wavered again as the maidservant adjusted her grip on the lantern. "She says there's a diver watching her," the maidservant said, her voice trembling. "Who else could I come to?" Meher strode over to the maidservant, who flinched back. "What's your name?" "Sarah, my lady," said the maidservant. "Give me the lantern, Sarah," said Meher. "I don't need you to light the way." The nursery was undisturbed. The living room was lit, candlelight flickering on the bright cushions and throws strewn across the marble floor. Arwa's bedroom, in the next room along, was dark. The guardswoman trailed in reluctantly behind Meher and Arwa. Her hands were fixed firmly on her scabbard. "There's no need for this, my lady," the guardswoman said. "Lady Arwa simply had a nightmare, I'm sure of it." "Are you?" Meher replied mildly. The guardswoman hesitated, then said, "I told Lady Arwa's nursemaid and the maidservants that Diver don't exist, that they should tell her so, but—" She paused, glancing uneasily at Meher's face. "The Irin are superstitious." Meher returned the look. This one, she thought, has not been in Arena long. "I ran into the room as soon as she screamed," said the guard, pressing on despite Meher's pointed silence. "I saw nothing." Ignoring her, Meher nudged Arwa gently with her foot. "Go on, love. Show me where it is." Arwa took in another deep breath and stood straight, mustering up her courage. Then she went into her bedroom. Meher followed close behind, the guardswoman still hovering at her back. "There," Arwa said, pointing. "It's moved, on the window ledge." Meher looked up and found the diver already watching her. Pale dawn was coming in through the window lattice at its back. Silhouetted against it, the diver was a wisp of taloned shadows, its wings bristling darkly against a backdrop of grey-gold light. It was small for a diver, no larger than Arwa, with nothing in its eyes that was human. Nothing human in the... that went a bit wrong, let me try that again. It was small for a diver, no larger than Arwa, with nothing human in the shape of its face or in the lidless glare of its golden eyes. "Stay where you are, Arwa," Meher said. "Just lift the lamp higher." Meher walked towards it, slowly, so as not to startle it from its perch. The diver's eyes followed her with the constancy of prayer flames. 3 floors above the ground, beneath heavily guarded walls, nothing should have been able to reach Arwa's chambers. But Diver didn't obey the rules of human courtesy, and there were no walls in Jai Arena that could keep them out of a place they wanted to be. Still, Meher's gut told her this diver was not dangerous. Curious, perhaps, but not dangerous. Just to be sure, she held her hands in front of her, arms crossed, her fingers curled into a sigil to ward against evil. The diver didn't so much as flinch. Good. "What are you doing?" whispered Arwa. "Speaking. Hush now." Meher drew her hands close together, thumbs interlocked, fanning out her fingers in the old sigil for bird. The diver rustled its wings in recognition. It knew its name when it saw it. "Ah," breathed Meher. Her heart was beating fast in her chest. "You can move now, love. There's nothing to be afraid of." "It still looks like it wants to bite me," Arwa said warily. "It's a bird spirit," Meher said. "That's what birds do, but there's nothing evil inside it. It's a simple creature. It won't hurt you." She took another step closer. The diver cocked its head. She could smell the air around it, all humid sweetness like incense mingled with water. She sucked in a deep breath and resisted the urge to set her fingers against the soft shadows of its flesh. She held one palm out. Go. But there was no compulsion behind the movement, and the diver did not look at all inclined to move. It watched her expectantly, its nostrils tucked in the shadows of its face flared wide. It knew what she was. It was waiting. Arwa gave a squeak when Meher drew the dagger from her sash, and behind them the guardswoman startled into life, drawing the first inch of her sword out with a hiss of steel. Calm, calm, Meher said soothingly. I'm just giving it what it wants. She pressed the sharp edge of her dagger to her left thumb. The skin gave way easily, a bead of blood rising to the surface. She held her thumb out for the diver. The diver lowered its head, smelling her blood. For a long moment it held still, its eyes never leaving hers. Then the shadow of its flesh broke apart, thin wisps escaping through the lattice. She saw it coalesce back into life beyond the window, dark wings sweeping through the cloudless, brightening air. Meher let out a breath she hadn't known that she'd been holding. There was no fear in her, just the aching, racing joy of of a small adventure. She pressed her thumb carefully against the window lattice, leaving her mark behind. All gone, she said. Is it really? Awa asked. Yes. Meher wiped the remaining blood from the dagger with her sash. She tucked the blade away again. If I'm not here and a diver comes, Awa, you must offer it a little of your own blood. Then it will leave you alone. Why would it want my blood? Awa asked, frightened. Her eyes were wide. Meher? Meher felt a pang. There was so much Awa didn't know about her heritage, so much that Meher was forbidden from teaching her. And that's the beginning of the book. I did remove a little bit in the middle there, but I think you get the gist of the story. Essentially, Empire of Sand is about a girl who is descended from Diver, so these shadowy spirits are her ancestors. And it follows her story, and then Realm of Ash, which is the second book, is all about her sister Awa, who's only 9 years old in the first novel. So there's about a 15-year gap between both books, which is pretty significant. So I'll wave my hand in case anybody was trying to skip the reading and wants to hear the interview questions, which I'm now going to move on to. So thank you everyone who sent me questions. That was really helpful of you because it meant I didn't have to come up with original things to talk about, which I always find super helpful. I love being able to interact and talk with people, so talking to my own face in a camera is somewhat of an interesting experience, but we're going to chug on. Right, so one of the questions I was sent, which I was quite pleased to receive, was, what's a favourite random Indian history fact of yours, if you have one? So I have many random Indian history facts. A lot of them are about severed heads. I will not go into those right now, because they're the facts I always bring up. But one of the favourite things that I learnt about Mughal Indian history in particular, when I was researching the books of Amber, was a little story about Babur, who was the first Mughal emperor. He came over and took over swathes of India, and then he died, and then everything went a bit wrong for a bit, and then things got a bit better, the usual arc of history. He came and conquered India, and he absolutely loathed it, and helpfully he kept a diary of all his different thoughts about his various wives, his drinking partners, his younger boyfriend once. But one of the things he wrote in his diaries was a diatribe about India and how much he hated it. And one of the things that he really hated about India, apart from the weather, which he absolutely loathed because he was from a much cooler climate, was the lack of mangoes. So he was like, these heathens don't even have mangoes. And I don't know, that blew my mind because I associate mangoes with India so heavily. Pakistani and Indian mangoes are some of the best. I will brook no argument on this matter. I was just like, India didn't have mangoes? What was India without mangoes? My whole conception of India and its culinary history was completely blown. But no, India had no mangoes. Babur was one of the people, I assume, who brought them over because he missed them so much. Another fact that blew my mind along the food arena is that India didn't used to have chilies. I had a colleague who told me that. They came over later, probably as part of the Silk Road, is my guess. Don't ask me. Before that, a lot of the cuisine that we consider spicy used pepper. So there you go. Right, so moving on to a slightly more writing-related question. Somebody on Twitter asked me, do you have tips or techniques for pacing a slow burn romance? And I really love this question. I get told a lot that the romances in my books are slow burn, and they are, but I do that sort of without making it a conscious decision. So one answer would be, I don't know how to write a slow burn romance, I just do. I wish I could write any other kind, but I can't. But that would be an unhelpful answer and wouldn't help anybody to write a slow burn romance themselves, so instead I'll give you a slightly better one. So I made notes to help me, which is why I'm looking down. I find that what makes a slow burn romance, a romance that takes a long time to reach the point where people confess their feelings or become intimate, romantically, emotionally, physically, whatever it might be, is a long negotiation of people's boundaries. So I think in a lot of real life romantic relationships we have, and in fiction, people will often fall in love or become intimate with one another in some way before they reveal all their insecurities, their secrets, their pains, the kind of weird neuroses that you don't tell people about until you absolutely have no choice. in a slow burn romance, you do a lot of that revealing and negotiation before you ever admit your feelings to each other or even to yourself. So in the first book, the romantic relationship we follow is between Meher, the main character, who is a nobleman's daughter with the secret magic through her descent from the diver through her mother, and her love interest is a man called Åcon, who is basically stuck in a situation that he doesn't want to be in. He's also descended from those diver. He marries her under duress. She marries him under duress. And he's got a lot of problems because he's had a really hard life, and so has Meher. And so they don't trust each other. They're trying both to do the right thing, but they both have a lot of reasons not to put faith in each other and a lot of limits and fears and weaknesses that they don't want to reveal to each other. And for a lot of the book, what makes their romance slow burn is that they reveal those things bit by bit. Equally in Realm of Ash, which is the sequel, Arwa is a widow. She's been through a really horrible experience where her husband died in a massacre, which was very mysterious and not many people know a lot about. And her love interest is the illegitimate son of the emperor, who is in a very dangerous and tenuous position, trying to do some very heretical magic in order to save the empire. And both of them, again, have a lot of fears that they need to get through and a lot of distrust, and that takes time to negotiate. So if you want to write a slow burn romance, I would say think of all the layers of messed upness that your characters have, much like normal people do, and work through them piece by piece before you ever allow your characters to consider whether they could love each other. Right, so that was quite a long answer, but hopefully it was helpful. The next question I have is, I am wildly fascinated with how you managed to deal with matters of consent in Meher and Amon's forced marriage. Can you say more about what thoughts and considerations went into writing that aspect of their relationship? Oof, it's a tricky question. I think a lot of fantasy, Game of Thrones is probably a good example of this, deals with consent. It depicts non-consent, where people are unable to consent or where the consent is forcefully taken from them in a variety of different situations, be they physical or otherwise. And sometimes fantasy does that very well, but in the majority of cases I don't think it does, because I don't think that consent and its nuances and the way that unequal systems can make consent impossible or difficult to provide is discussed in enough detail in our culture, never mind in fantasy itself. So this isn't like a problem that's specific to fantasy. And it's a thing I think about a lot. So I really wanted to explore consent, both the limitations of it and how much free will and choice we can have or wrestle for ourselves in very unequal situations, like a forced marriage under a despotic, semi-immortal religious figure, for example, because that's what happens in Empire of Sand. That, I don't know where I started that sentence, but that's something I wanted to explore. I wanted to explore agency and consent in a nuanced way without necessarily maybe giving full answers to that issue. I just wanted to explore it. And I was able to do that by having this forced marriage between Meher and Åcon and exploring the fact that although they've been forced into this situation, it is deeply unfair and horrific. They try and make the best of it. They try to protect each other's choices and to make their own choices within very, very limited parameters where if they do something wrong, it could be life or death. So I'm not sure that answers your question. I wanted to explore consent, so I did. My aim was to look at it in a nuanced way, and I hope that through the interaction between the characters and the conversations they have and that negotiation that's sort of inherent to a slow burn romance, that I was able to look at the importance of choices and free will and of love in a way that's meaningful, and how those things might be possible in an imperial system that denies free will and choice and dignity, I guess. So yeah, no easy answers, but that's what I wanted to do, and hopefully I did that successfully. So moving on from there, the next question I had is, could you comment briefly on how you see the role of violence in your books as a means of oppression and as a means of resistance? That feels like a very relevant question to our current times. And I would say that the way we explore violence in fiction is very different from the way that violence is often felt and experienced in reality. So, in fantasy, you will often find characters using violence as a means to protect themselves and as a means to fight for what they believe in, and it is depicted as heroic. And it can be heroic to defend yourself and to fight for what you believe in. But oddly enough, often in real life, when people do this and they defend themselves and they stand up for what they believe in, they are not called heroes. So, even though they should be. And that is quite a difference between reality and fiction. So, putting that aside, I didn't want to make my main characters, who are the oppressed people in this situation, be the violent heroes, because although they would not necessarily have been lauded for that in real life, and it would have been a very brave choice, in fiction, if you are violent and you protect yourself, you're usually given a good rep in books. Think of things like The Hunger Games. And if you try and survive using other skills, so you use cunning and manipulation, and you have to just survive in horrible situations, you're depicted as kind of weak. That's been my experience reading a lot of fantasy. You may disagree with that, absolutely fine if you do, but it was very important to me to show my main character use skills other than violence in order to survive the situation she was in, because in the context of what happens to Meher and Ammon, if she used violence, she probably wouldn't survive. So I wanted to show that sometimes the choice to live and the choice to make what choices you can in a difficult situation are brave and valid decisions. So that's how I depicted resistance. I'm not sure really that resistance was violent. The violence from the oppressor is depicted through literal violence, but often it's the threat of violence. It's violence embedded into the system. So the culture will destroy you if you are someone who doesn't fit in. Once Meher and Ammon are in the evil, sinister religious figure's temple, they find that the threat of violence from him is always something on the horizon. So it's always the possibility of violence is almost worse than the lived reality of it. Circling back to resistance and violence, though, it occurs to me that when you resist being controlled by evil people or evil systems, even if you do that in a way that isn't, a straight up war with a sword, as you do in fantasy, that resistance is a violence against the oppressive system. So, not to ruin the book, but there are two. When Meher and Ammon do, to some extent, overcome the control over them and find some kind of freedom, hopefully that's vague enough, it destroys or threatens to destroy the empire. So if you have a violent system, an imperial colonial system, for example, that uses violence in order to maintain its own power, dismantling it is a violence against that system. Again, not sure I answered your question, but I wanted to depict different kinds of resistance against power, and I think I focused a lot of my attention on depicting the violence of the empire rather than the kind of violent resistance that people who are oppressed could use against it. I wanted to depict other kinds of resistance, which I wouldn't necessarily say are passive or pacifist, but are more centered on survival. So, very rambling answer, I apologise for that. But moving on again. How has reading/loving romance novels affected writing romance arcs in fantasy for you? Specifically in the writing process, what kind of lessons or techniques have romance novels taught you? Loads. I love romance novels. So I have read romance novels for a long time. I probably read about as much romance as I read fantasy, so that's a pretty significant amount. And the one thing that romance does really, really well is character interactions. So the relationships between the two main love interests, it's usually two, the way that they express their feelings to each other, the way that they unravel each other's emotional arcs or their emotional journeys are connected together, all of that kind of like character interaction and emotional emotional narrative and emotional journey stuff is something romance does fantastically, and it's something I've tried to use in my own work. Generally, when you read a romance, they can make just character interaction extremely compelling without any external forces. That is very hard to do if you've never done it. It's much easier to throw a dragon in and see how people react to a threat than it is to make the threat come from their own fears or history. So that's something I hope I've been able to bring into my fantasy, just focusing on characters. And I would say that straight and sapphic romances are very, very good at centering women's experiences and women's feelings in the heart of a narrative and giving them validity. So not just their desires, but their emotional reality, their dreams, their fears become the center of the story. And although fantasy does this, there's a lot of fantasy that's focused on women, it's still something I think that romance does particularly well, and it's hopefully something I've also, again, brought into my own books. So romance has had a big influence on me. Right, so somebody asked me who my favourite character from The Untamed is, which one has the best hair, and who I'm most likely to base my characters on. And the reason they've done this is because I'm absolutely obsessed with the web novel, The Untamed. No, it is a web novel, the web drama, sorry. Which is broadly, it's a Chinese drama, and it's about a resurrected evil necromancer and who is trying to solve a crime along with the guy who's been in love with him for like 16 years, but the necromancer doesn't know it because he's a chaos bisexual and also just doesn't seem very good at relationships, to be honest. And it's very big on yearning, and everyone's very beautiful, and it's got a lot of emotion in it, and I love it. So I won't go on about it anymore. I will answer the question though. My favourite character is Lan Wangji, who is the one who's in love with the main character because he is pristine and beautiful, and I want to be pristine and beautiful, I suppose. I'm not going to judge the hair because they're all wearing wigs, and I'm unlikely to base a character on any character from The Untamed, but I have put a lot more yearning looks and wrist grabbing into the Jasmine Throne as a result of watching The Untamed, so you learn so much from other people's work, and I didn't mean to knock that glass, but I did. Okay, so I have one last question here, which is, how has the fanfic world and your time in it influenced / interacted with your book writing? For anyone who doesn't follow my Twitter, which I assume is most people, I used to write fanfic when I was younger. And really loved it. So when I was about 10, I think I discovered Sailor Moon fanfic and something called moonromance.net, and I wrote tons of stories on there. They were really bad because I was 10. And then I proceeded to write a lot of bad fanfic in a lot of different fandoms, even Harry Potter, alas, even though we have cancelled that now. And I don't think I would be a writer without fanfic, so that is definitely a huge influence on my writing in that it exists now. My books exist because I wrote fanfic. I did a creative writing degree, but I think, frankly, fanfic had more of an influence on me as a writer than doing a qualification in writing. So, you know, if you're wondering how to become a writer, fully recommend going for fanfic because it's free, and writing degrees cost money. The benefit of fanfic is it lets you explore your own writing and try new things and do them wrong or do them not very well or do them excellently, of course. Maybe you'll start at a better place than I did, and receive enthusiastic support from other people who are predisposed to love your work. And that's really, really lovely because I think when you're learning to write, having that kind of enthusiastic support is very, very important. And once you start writing professionally, although there are people who will admire your work or really love it, critique is inherent into the process. You will be critiqued constantly and rejected, and that's fine because it's a business, but you need to have a level of confidence in your own work and an understanding of why it's good. It's good if you're getting published, or it's good if you're doing it for fun. You need to understand that inherent goodness before you face that kind of critique. So getting that chance to explore writing was very, very important to me. In what ways has it influenced my own or interacted with my own book writing? Well, I think part of what I've learned about romantic dynamics and writing romance also came from writing fan fiction, not just from romance novels. And frankly, I read a lot more queer content in fan fiction than I ever did in romance novels. It's only recently that I've really engaged with reading like sort of umbrella term queer romance fiction. So that was really good for me. I write straight romances in my first two books, but reading widely about romance in different contexts gives you more of an understanding of how to do it well. So that was really helpful. I also think maybe my writing is influenced by a real desire to have fan fiction of my own work. I would love if there was a fandom for my writing. Of course, I wouldn't be able to read any of it, but I would like it to exist. So maybe that's a career goal. So yeah, that's how fan fiction has influenced my work. And frankly, I think being a fan of something gives you so much inspiration and so much joy that it does feed into your original writing. I know that through this pandemic, having The Untamed to watch has been really good for my mental well-being because it's given me something to focus on that brings me a lot of joy, and it's given me an inbuilt community of people that I can talk to and kind of go, I think this is so cool, and they go, oh, I think this is cool too, and then we can talk about all the nuances of all the different themes and ideas and characters. When you're writing your own original fiction, you don't get the chance to kind of like dig down into how cool it is that XYZ happened in a particular scene because it's your own work. You only have yourself to enthuse about with it, which is, again, great. It's great to write your own stuff, but it's nice to be able to kind of really enjoy something with company. So that's sort of the end of the questions that I was going to answer, but I will say briefly that although it's a shame that the convention isn't going ahead this year, I'm really hoping to come along next year. And I think it's really lovely that we've had the opportunity to do this video. I apologise for all the rambling. I am usually a lot more cogent than this, but it's actually almost midday here, so it's not that late in the day. I should have had enough sleep. But anyway, I'm usually more cogent than this. I'm not particularly cogent today. I apologise. But it's nice to have the opportunity to still have a little bit of sort of interaction with Congoers, even through a screen, because I think that these kind of fan events where we all get together and share our joy for sci-fi and fantasy are so important, because in the end we are all fans. You know, this genre is our fandom. We love this, and it's so nice to be able to share our joy with each other, and hopefully at some point I will get to meet some of you in person and share how much I love fantasy with all of you, and maybe we can talk about Doctor Who or something, or maybe some of you watch The Untamed and we can talk about that. That would be great. I really do think that in these extremely trying times, the fact that we have this joy and this interest in fiction is really important, and it brings us a lot of happiness, and I'm glad that we're able to have that happiness and be able to share it. And my dungarees have come open, so I'm just going to do those up again. And yeah, I am really glad to have done this. So thank you for listening, and I want to thank the con organisers for putting this together. I'm sorry this video is so rambly. I really appreciate the opportunity. If anyone has any questions about all the things I've said, particularly where I sort of went off on a tangent and then forgot what I was saying, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I'm on Tasha Drinks Tea, and I will try and explain what I was trying to say. Always happy to do that. Again, thank you for having me. It's been lovely, and I wish you a good rest of weekend convention and rest of day.